Hello everyone, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, if you think it's dark driving on some stretches of uptown, the Interstate in eastern New Orleans should require infrared glasses. We'll examine tonight why so much of the area is still in the dark. We'll also try to spread light on the squabble over Common Core, the mayor looking for money, the legality locally of gay marriages, the status of school property, a former council member avoids jail a little longer, and what to expect from summer tourism. On board with us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Danielle Dreillinger, reporter for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. We're going to go first over to Danielle and try to see if we have can get a little bit more clarity, if that's at all possible, about what's going on with Common Core. If you can just kind of briefly background us quickly, what is Common Core, and then what's the score? Because right now it seems to be Bessie versus the governor.
Right. So Common Core is a set of standards that lay out what kids are supposed to be able to accomplish in math and English in every grade. So it's not a curriculum. It's, this year they should be able to analyze 2 paragraphs and draw conclusions and write an essay. And so Louisiana adopted these standards in 2010, and Governor Jindal was a big fan of them at the time. And they were initially adopted by 46 states and DC. But since then, he has gradually and now undeniably turned against them. He considers them, it's rhetoric that's coming up in a lot of places around the country, that he considers them a federal intrusion into local control. And he's also concerned about new tests that the state is supposed to use next year that are developed by a multi-state consortium. So what happened was, a week and a half ago, he finally threw down the gauntlet, laid out his game plan for how he wants to get the state to drop Common Core and block these tests. And this has immediately, of course, spun into legal tactics and back and forth and people making statements. So unfortunately, there's only so much clarity we can bring to this for the time being.
Yeah. So there's going to be a special meeting next week of the Bessie board. And this is going to be to discuss, because the governor, regarding the testing, had threatened to yank the contract that the state already has for testing, which of course the school systems that said, wait a minute, if you don't know that, we don't have tests then for next year.
Right, and it actually came to a real immediate head. So the state superintendent and the elementary and secondary education board both very strongly support Common Core. And the legislature has supported it as well. They could have passed laws against it in the last session, and they didn't. And
there were several laws that they had to consider about it, too.
Right. There were hours and hours and hours of testimony on Common Core. So what Jindal is doing, he's pretty unique in this situation where he opposes Common Core, but the legislature and the education officials are for it. He has put in place a bunch of strategies to keep the state from buying the multi-state test. But as part of this, he suspended the contract for the test that we have now. And this week, the education superintendent John White sent out this email, and we realized that the retests of the LEAP and the iLEAP that happened this month, they couldn't be scored because the contract was frozen. And in response, Jindal unfroze that part of the contract, so at least there can be tests over the summer, but it leaves complete unanswered questions about what tests the state is going to use next year.
And if those scores were not released, then students and parents would not know if the student was going to progress to the next grade. That was really going to cause a lot of difficulty and confusion, more than already exists.
Right, this is a key thing that happens every summer.
So the special meeting with Bessie next week, what is that going to consider exactly?
So officially they're going to be considering their response legally, possibly, to these various back and forth strategies. And Jindal has issued some executive orders, and are they constitutional? But what I think it's really going to be is another open, long forum for everybody on both sides of the issue to come out and restate their positions.
Back in the days when I guess it was about 20, 30 years ago, when the when the Federal Department of Education was started, there was that same sort of split. I mean, there was like this Democrat-Republican split, that there are some people, and I guess there's some constitutional argument that can be made that education was given to be a responsibility to the states, and so there are some people who say that the federal government shouldn't be involved. On the other hand, if you're going to be competing with people nationally, then doesn't the federal government need to get involved?
Right. Well, and is this really a partisan split, though, in terms of Common Core? I mean, the business and industry has come out saying we support Common Core and we don't like what the governor is doing.
Right, and my favorite part of this, in that strange bedfellow sense, because the mainstream Republican view has supported Common Core for sure. The Tea Party side has not. Yeah. And Conrad Appel, the state senator from Metairie, who's a Republican and a businessman, has been called a socialist.
Right. And Jindal is in line with the coalition of the status quo, the unions now.
And there was a statement that came out today from some legislators, though, asking for everybody to remain calm on the issue and to have some real dialogue.
Well, we'll see what kind of dialogue we'll get next week out of the Bessie meeting, which may go into an executive session, so we may not know exactly what they say. More on that to come for sure. Thanks a lot, Danielle. Okay, over to the question of former City Councilman Renee Gill-Pratt, who has now earned another day in court instead of heading off to jail, which she was supposed to be doing fairly soon.
We were trying to count out at the office how many lives she's had, maybe 5 or 6 at this point. If we want to go back, she had one trial that ended in a mistrial. One juror did not want to convict her. Everybody else did. There was a second trial. She was convicted. And her sentencing has been reviewed. First, she was sentenced to 7 years, and then the appeals court suggested 6, and then the judge came back and said 4. And now her lawyer is basically doing what all the good criminal lawyers these days are doing, coming in and saying that the case was tainted by the U.S. attorney commenting scandal.
Online commenting scandal, yeah.
And the attorney's name is Mike Fowler. He found the judge was interested in what he had to say. Let's put it that way. Judge Ivan Lamel spent a lot of time on the stand actually quoting Judge Kurt Engelhardt, who is the only judge in that courthouse who has actually thrown out a conviction because of the scandal. That was, of course, the Danziger Bridge scandal, and that's, again, strange bedfellows. Engelhardt is probably the most conservative judge in that court. Lamel is maybe one of the most liberal, if not the. And but boy, they're both really angry over this and feel it was very prejudicial. And of course, everybody agrees on that. The question is, did it have any effect on the jury? So what Lamel said, he basically, Renee Gill-Pratt was supposed to go to prison on Monday. She now has gotten another stay. We don't know when her report date will be. In the meantime, he's done something very unusual. He's actually asked at least 2 jurors, we're starting with 2 jurors, to submit 2 written questions on what they read on NOLA.com, which is where the, 3 years ago, as if in the comments section, 3 years ago. So, I mean, I don't envy these jurors, I have to say.
So those were 2 jurors who admitted that they read NOLA.com in the Times-Picayune. That's all they said they read it.
But, then there's the question, did they read the comments? Then there's the question, did they give any undue weight to the comments, not knowing that they were from a U.S. attorney.
And so right now they're going to be responding to questions
in writing. And the 2 sides are supposed to submit suggested questions to the judge, and he will develop a questionnaire. And where it goes from there, we don't really know, because this is pretty unusual.
It is. Is this the first time that jurors have been brought into this?
It's the first. It may be. It's the first time that people in the legal community can remember, and certainly on this case, most of the other people who've tried to pursue this avenue haven't gotten far. But of course, there's the Danziger case, so everybody knows that it's a possibility.
Right. And so quickly, when do you think this would happen then?
They have a couple weeks to submit the questions, and then we'll go.
Well, you wonder if it takes a unanimous verdict to convict, which is what happened, then what happens with this if 1 or 2 jurors say, I was prejudiced by this?
And you have to say, these are jurors who went through the selection process initially, so presumably they are not going to say that.
Because
it's hard to know what they're looking for, really.
All righty, Stephanie. Okay, moving on to our next topic, and that's going to be about darkness out in New Orleans East.
Oh my goodness. Darkness
how dark is it?
It's extremely dark. I actually drove it Monday night, driving back in on a long trip, and you get across the bridge in New Orleans East, and once you come across the twin spans and really get to the site of the old Jazzland, you've got about a 2-mile long stretch of Interstate 10 in New Orleans East where there is nary a streetlight working. There are complaints dating back to 2011 of people alleging that accidents were made worse because it was so dark. The city says there are about 800 lights out in that part, and it is a city responsibility to take care of those lights on the federal interstate highway. It's not the state, it's not the feds, it's the city. And the city now says they have a plan in place and they're working on it. Last week, the city council transferred or voted to transfer $1.7 million in capital funding to the Department of Public Works for that project. It's money that had been paying off a bond issue that has been completed. And it has to go to capital projects. It can't replace the light bulbs. It has to repair the broken lights. The city has 54,000 street lights roughly that it's dealing with, and there is no dedicated source of funding for any repairs or replacements or anything. And the administration told me actually today they're working to try to figure out permanent funding sources because it's just not a system that's working. These street lights have not been out since Katrina. They have been repaired and gone back out. They're dealing in some cases with old-fashioned light bulbs that last 3 years or less. They're doing conversions citywide to LED lights. There's now a funding source for that as well. But if they go and put the LED lights in with the funding they've received from Entergy, and the LED light bulb doesn't come on, well, then it goes from a replacement to a repair, and the money from Entergy that paid for that replacement can't pay for the repair. So it's funny money. It's this pot of money pays for one thing, and this pot of money pays for another thing, and if the problems cross, well, the money doesn't. So they are working on it. The lights in New Orleans East on the interstate should start getting repaired and or replaced within the next month and be back and bright and be a better light system so that it is not so dark out there. The leftover money from that capital funding will be used either for the more than 32 lights along St. Charles Avenue that are not working, where it is also extremely dark and becoming unsafe, or already is unsafe.
Oh, it's there. It's unsafe.
Yeah, I mean,
and we anticipate leftover money?
There should be some leftover money because there's $1.7 million in capital funding coming in. There are 800 lights out. Each replacement costs about $1,500, so that math, you get to $1.2 million. So you're still left with $500,000 to repair more lights. Yeah. So it should hopefully fix more. But there were citywide, they say, you know, when Mayor Landrieu's administration took office, there were 16,000 lights out citywide. That number is down to 5,200. There have been 43,000 some odd repairs in the time Mayor Landrieu's been in office. They really need to get, basically what the mayor's folks said to me today, they need a better widget, and they're trying to find their better widget, but it hasn't worked yet. And these not dedicated funding sources just make it a bigger problem when you've got this pocket of money that can only be dedicated to replacement and this that can only be dedicated to repair, and you're working different projects. You know, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah, St. Charles Avenue, so many people are close to the street, getting off of a streetcar or jogging or riding their bicycle.
And it is
they get into that dark
dark
patch, and it is really dangerous.
So it definitely is a safety issue, and it's also a money issue, and we're going to talk about that right now with Stephanie.
Yes.
You know, over these past few months, the mayor and his team have been heavily lobbying the legislature to get some revenue-raising packages through. He got one with the property tax. Now he's lobbying the people.
Yes, he didn't. This probably is not the one he would have preferred, because this means he has to go to his voters and say, how much are you willing to cough up? He had, of course, tried to get hotel motel tax money, some other sources. So basically what the legislature did is allowed him to, they put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that will be this November. If voters statewide and in Orleans Parish approve it, that means that the city can hold another election seeking an increase in property taxes up to 5 mils for police, up to 5 mils for fire. And it's to deal with these, what he likes to call unfunded mandates. He sounds like a Republican sometimes talking about this. But he's talking about the police consent decree, the sheriff's consent decree, and also the firefighters pension fund. He's, of course, under court order to pay basically $17 million to shore that up. It's interesting. He had a speech at BGR. BGR staged a speech, and he kind of laid out his plan. We'll be hearing a lot more of it later. What he said is that he is going to seek, if the voters approve it, if the voters let him, he will seek the full 5 mils for police. One of the people who asked a question was a guy named Nick Felton, who's the head of the firefighters union, who asked for some clarity on what he planned to do on that. And the mayor looked at him and said, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see what the voters want to do. Do they want to put their money into a system that needs reform, or do they want streetlights? Do they want libraries? So when you put it that way, of course, there's not going to be an either or vote, but he basically told them they need to go out and sell it. He is very angry about this court order. He's trying to exhaust every legal avenue. He's exhausted pretty much most, if not all of them.
Regarding the firefighters?
And of course, the firefighters are getting paid, and the issue isn't necessarily would the retirees get paid. The issue is the fund, does it have the requisite amount of money in it?
So what other strategies will he have to try to convince? Now, this is also assuming that this passes this fall, right?
Yes, statewide.
Statewide, yeah, for the property tax raise here.
And there are other issues, there's probably going to be a separate millage for libraries. Marlon Gusman, the sheriff, said the other day that he's actually going to go to the voters to ask for permission not to raise taxes, but to rededicate some taxes from capital expenses to operating expenses, so that should help some. I mean, one of the bright spots, I guess, is that the city is doing very well in terms of sales taxes and has had some kind of unexpected success. And as we have more and more retail opening, there's some hope that some of the pressure could be taken off. But he basically said he's going back to the legislature next year. He's putting together a plan, and he feels that New Orleans does more than its share in terms of hosting the big tourism events, the big Super Bowls and everything else, and doesn't get enough of the revenue from it. A lot of it just flows through the city and goes to the state. He even talked about Super Bowls, which is kind of interesting because, of course, he sought another Super Bowl and didn't get it. But
so is that special taxing district along the riverfront that sort of came up at the very end of the section?
Right.
Do you think that's still alive with that idea?
That I'm not sure. He didn't mention that specifically.
Yeah. But he still needs to find money. Basically, that's the bottom line.
This is a year away. Basically, he said he's going to go and basically make a moral argument, the way he put it. The problem is the legislators they're dealing with, they don't have a whole lot of money either. They have a big budget shortfall there too. So
okay, Stephanie, thanks. We're talking about money. What's something that could help is summer tourism. If we have an increase in summer tourism, that can generate dollars.
It is. Unfortunately, it looks like the summer's going to be a little soft this year. Cities that depend on conventions usually suffer a little bit during the summer. I mean, you get conventions, but it's not the big money conventions like when the doctors roll into town. Usually it's fraternal organizations and that sort of thing. I was looking at the list of the of conventions of 3,000 people or more. There are 10 of them between July 1st and October 1st, but among this is like the Order of Elks, a convention of locksmiths, and the National Baptist Convention. Nothing wrong with those conventions, but those aren't the people that are traveling on huge expense accounts, and so they tend to be more of low spending conventions, and so there'll be activity, but not a whole lot. And so that's what happens when you depend on conventions. The same thing. The Caribbean islands run into this because they depend on snowbirds, and so they depend on people who travel during the winter, and so in the summer they're in trouble. That's why some islands have Mardi Gras celebrations in August, just to create business. But what the city is counting on is, first of all, getting staycations. I mean, getting people to come into New Orleans. I was talking to the hotel manager last night, and he says, we got great deals for locals if they want to come and stay at the hotel. And there's always lots of festivals. I mean, there's the Essence Festival, and there's Tales for the Cocktails, and there's an Hispanic festival. And so there's a festival almost every weekend, and each one brings in a little niche of people to it, but there's just not that really super thing. And I think the next really big event in terms of a really big money event is in November, and that's the convention of anesthesiologists. That's where the money is. And so once they've been rolling in, of course, and then by October, once you start getting the football games going and the football crowd coming in, then you can start building it up. But the summer's going to be a little tough.
But certainly having Essence and like Tales of the Cocktail, that does liven up the summer, which used to be really, really a very, very slow time. But
the thing is like for restaurateurs, like Essence is a lot of events that are during the evening, and so it's not. I don't think it's the crowd that's going to go out, to the big expensive restaurants. Now they may be doing lunches and things like that, and it's a little bit the same thing with Tales of the Cocktail. They're whining and dining all day long, but all those things help. I mean, they all help by bits and pieces.
And certainly staycation, that's a good idea, because generally the hotels really do have good deals in the summertime.
New Orleans is a great place to visit. That's the one disadvantage we have living here, is that we're not inclined to come and visit here. But to stay here is just a wonderful place, and especially during the summer, and you can get some good deals.
The restaurants do a lot of specials too.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so time to think about going to visit the French Quarter and having a weekend there. Thanks a lot,
Right
Errol.
now.
Right now, exactly. Back over now to Stephanie, and there was a hearing in federal court, Martin Feldman's court today,
Correct.
regarding gay marriage in
It was a
Louisiana.
couple days ago. It was Wednesday.
This week, yeah.
Yes, this is kind of long awaited. You know, every state's getting its turn because there are challenges all over the place. This was Louisiana's, and it's interesting. This is a case, the plaintiffs, I think, strategically brought this a very narrow case that was basically asking the judge to recognize marriages performed legally in other states for people who live here. There is, of course, a constitutional amendment on the books that was adopted 10 years ago that bans all same-sex marriages. They didn't ask for the clerk of courts to start issuing marriage licenses. They basically asked for a recognition of these legal marriages. So there was a very legalistic, kind of interesting hearing on, really, the Supreme Court a year ago issued a decision overturning the Defense of Marriage Act, the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, but allowing states to continue to make their own laws. The argument, the plaintiff was from New York, and the argument there was that New York is, if New York wants to allow same-sex marriage, it can. But then the judge's question was, well, if Louisiana doesn't, should a judge overturn that, or is that a states' rights issue? The interesting thing that happened at the end, though, is the judge said, I don't want to just decide part of this. I want to decide the whole ball of wax. I don't want to leave some things unresolved. So basically, he asked the two sides to give him some briefs on the overall question of whether marriage should be allowed at all. And that's the question of whether marriages can be performed here.
So let me ask you the whole ball of wax,
Yes.
that being some other cases that are before his court?
Well, there are actually 3 cases that were consolidated, and all 3 of them included the question of whether people who get married elsewhere should have their marriages recognized here. One of the cases involves plaintiffs who want to get married here. So, and that really is that's where this is all headed.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting things is that while this hearing was happening, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeal in Denver came down with the first appeals court ruling that basically said, yes, same-sex marriage should be legal under all circumstances. So that one of the reasons I think they took the more narrow approach in Louisiana is that the appeals court here, the 5th Circuit Court, is the most conservative in the land. So the feeling is if any court will basically leave the ban in place, it would be this court. But what happens is if you have different appeals court decisions, then the Supreme Court they can leave that in place, but in this case it would be certainly very difficult for them to do that.
Okay, so that 10th Circuit decision, does it aim at this issue now to the Supreme Court, or not necessarily?
It moves it a step closer. When the Supreme Court came down with this decision, it was really only a year ago this week, and I think they thought they had bought some time. Nobody imagined that things would move this quickly, that I think they bought less time than they thought they would. They really are going to have to take up the basic constitutional rights question.
And so when will things be moving through Feldman's court here? Do we know?
The next key date is July 16th, and that's when the briefs on overall same-sex marriage are due.
All right, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Danielle, over to you, and it looks like there's going to have to be some rethinking of the master plan to rebuild schools.
Right, and this has been a long time coming, but the exact dollars were announced last night. So New Orleans has about $1.8 billion, mostly from FEMA, to rebuild and renovate schools post-Katrina. And they did something very unusual, which is they said, we know we have too many school buildings. So instead of rebuilding each school, they have this very complicated plan that sells off some of the buildings and renovates some and keeps some. And it's based on demographics and where they think the kids are going to be living. And the good news, I would say, is that the demographics are coming in above projections. So more people want to send their kids to public school in New Orleans, especially in the younger grades. But construction costs are going up in part because there's so much construction going on in the city. And all of the cost estimates from the plan was last revised in 2011. All the cost estimates are just basically blown out of the water. So the two school systems, the Recovery School District and the Orleans Parish School Board, worked together on this plan. And they announced last night that they are $330 million short, they think, or up to, of being able to complete the part of the plan that isn't done yet. And the plan itself is really inadequate because they need to accommodate more kids.
Wouldn't there be some money coming into that pool from selling off the school buildings too, or is that already accounted for?
You know, that's a really good question. I was wondering it myself because people were pointing out to me. So for instance, John McDonough High School, right on Esplanade, there was a bunch of community protests and people really, in the community really wanted the school to remain a school, and the city said, okay. And someone pointed out to me that they would have made a lot of money selling that. So I don't know what the exact share is, but one of the questions is it takes a long time to sell schools. So that's another thing I learned this.
So how far along are they on the to-do list when they started out with this rebuilding plan? How much is left, percentage-wise?
They said that 80% of the plan is underway or completed. But when they say underway, they mean architects have been hired and they're putting together designs.
And they're looking at a $300 shortfall that they know of right now.
Right, and to make it even more complicated, they're starting to look beyond the end date of this round of reconstruction. And they realize now that they have too many high school seats planned. Well, but if they have more elementary kids, they're going to need more high school kids.
Down the line, right. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Danielle. Right now, I'm going to ask you guys to sort of take a look ahead.
Well, next week is the 4th of July, and the Audubon Insectarium and Nature Garden, which is on Canal Street, not the zoo, they're going to have an exhibit where they're going to have red, white, and blue butterflies. Wow. And so it's a special exhibit, so go to the Insectarium.
Really beautiful. Danielle?
Okay.
Well, World Cup. Come on, World Cup. I can't be the only person who's suddenly spending all this time in the weekends when I was going to do my to-do list watching soccer.
Yes, you do have a lot of company with that, I think.
You do. That's actually the thing I was going to talk about. It's Tuesday is the next game. It's the knockout round for the United States, Tuesday at 3 o'clock, actually. And I think you'll see, as we've seen every 4 years, when the Olympics come up or World Cup, you see a whole new generation of young people get excited about a new sport, and soccer really is taking on.
But how do they get excited about a game when the score is 1-0?
You watch it, and I can
you
tell
win
you.
by losing.
By losing.
Yes.
Okay, Stephanie.
For all of you people who say, look at Edwin Edwards' attempted comeback and say only in Louisiana, take a look up at Rhode Island. There's a former mayor named Buddy Cianci who is giving him a run for his money, I'd say. He qualified for mayor this week. He has served, Edwin Edwards served as governor 3 times. He has 1 conviction. Buddy Cianci served twice. He has 2 convictions. One for assaulting a man he thought was involved with his wife with a fire log, and the second one in a corruption investigation called, get this, Operation Plunder Dome.
You're right.
Yes.
When you thought Louisiana had it, maybe not necessarily so. Okay, thanks a lot, you guys, for being here this evening. I want to thank you for joining us. And next week, we will not be here, so we'll see you in 2 weeks, but watch some special programming next Friday for the celebration of July 4th. And have a wonderful 4th. Good evening. We'll see you.